Welcome to Sky High Stories. Daniel Carter pushed the hospital room door open with a confident smile on his face. The hallway behind him smelled faintly of antiseptics and cleaning supplies, but Daniel barely noticed. His mind was full of excitement and pride. After weeks of intense work, sleepless nights, and endless meetings, he had finally achieved something big at his company. The promotion he had been chasing for years was finally his, and now he was ready to share the news with his wife. "Emma," he said as he stepped inside the room. He expected to see relief on her face, maybe even tears of happiness. After all, she had been waiting for him. But the moment he walked in, something felt wrong. The room was quite quiet. Emma sat upright on the hospital bed, her hands resting gently on her large pregnant belly. The soft hospital lights fell across her pale face. She looked calm, almost strangely peaceful, but she didn't smile. She didn't rush to him. She didn't even look surprised to see him. Instead, she simply looked at him with distant eyes, as she were staring at someone she barely knew. Daniel's confident smile slowly faded. For weeks, he had imagined this moment. He pictured Emma's hugging him, telling him how proud she was. He thought she would be happy to see him finally standing there. But the woman in front of him looked completely different from the one he had imagined. "Hey," Daniel said again, his voice slightly uncertain now. "I came as soon as I could." Still, Emma said nothing. The silence in the room grew heavier with every passing second. Daniel stepped closer to the bed, confused. That was when something on the small table beside Emma caught his attention. A thin stack of papers. At first, he didn't think much about it, but then he noticed the bold words printed across the top page. "Divorce agreement." Daniel froze. For a moment, he thought he had read it wrong. His confident expression slowly turned into shock as his eyes moved from the papers back to Emma's calm face. This was not the welcome he had expected. And suddenly, Daniel realized something he had never considered before. Emma was no longer waiting for him. A few years earlier, Daniel and Emma's life had looked completely different. Back then, their small apartment was often filled with laughter, late conversations, and quiet dreams about the future. Daniel had been struggling to build his career, working long hours at a company where promotions came slowly and success felt far away. There were many nights when he returned home exhausted and frustrated, but Emma was always there waiting for him. She would sit beside him on the couch, listening patiently as he talked about his difficult vows, missed opportunities, and fears about the future. She never complained about the small apartment on their tight budget. Instead, she believed in him with a quiet confidence that Daniel sometimes she didn't even have in himself. "You will get there one day," she told him with a warm smile. "I know you will," and Daniel believed her. When Emma told him she was pregnant, it felt like the beginning of a beautiful new chapter. Daniel hugged her tightly that night, promising that he would work even harder to build a good life for their growing family. For a while, everything felt hopeful. Then things started to change. Daniel's career finally began to move forward. His boss started noticing his work. Bigger projects were given to him. His name was mentioned in important meetings. With every success, Daniel became busier. At first, Emma didn't mind. She was proud of him. She knew how hard he had worked to reach this point. But slowly, Daniel began coming home later and later. Sometimes he didn't come home until midnight. Sometimes he stayed overnight in the office during big projects. Doctor appointments came and went without him. Emma would sit alone in waiting rooms while other women held their husbands' hands. Her messages often remained unanswered for hours. When Daniel did reply, it was usually short, busy, talk later. At home, their conversations become shorter too. Daniel often talked about deals, promotions, and opportunities. His confidence grew stronger, but his patience grew weaker. Meanwhile, Emma kept telling herself the same thing again and again. Things will get better. She believed that once Daniel achieved his success, he would come back to her the way he used to be. So she waited. She waited through the quiet nights, the empty dinners, and the growing distance between them. But Daniel never noticed how much she was waiting. And on a quiet Tuesday night, Emma had just finished washing the dinner dishes when a sudden sharp pain spread across her lower stomach. At first, she thought it was normal pregnancy discomfort. She placed a hand on her belly and tried to breathe slowly, but the pain came again, stronger this time. Emma leaned against the kitchen counter, her heart starting to race. A wave of fear moved through her chest. Something didn't feel right. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone. She called Daniel. The phone rang once, twice, 5 times. No answer. Emma tried again, hoping he would finally pick up. Still nothing. Her breathing became faster as another painful cramp made her bend slightly forward. Panic slowly filled the quiet room apartment. Daniel, please answer, she whispered to herself, but the phone screen stayed silent. After several failed calls, Emma realized she could not wait anymore. With shaking hands, she walked to the door of her apartment and knocked on the neighbor's door across the hall. A middle-aged woman named Mrs. Alves opened it a moment later. The moment she saw Emma's pale face and frightened eyes, she didn't ask many questions. Hospital, Emma said quite weakly, holding her stomach. Within minutes, Mrs. Alvarez helped her into a car and drove her to the nearest hospital. The ride felt endless. Emma stared out of the window, holding her belly, whispering often soft prayers for her unborn baby. When she finally sat alone in the hospital room hours later, the fear slowly turned into something else. A painful realization. She had called her husband again and again during one of the scariest moments of her pregnancy, and he had not answered. Emma looked down at her phone, resting quietly in her hand. No missed calls from Daniel, no messages, no concern. For the first time since their marriage began, Emma understood something clearly. She couldn't depend on him anymore. And in that silent hospital room, Emma finally stopped waiting. Daniel finally returned. He walked into a hospital room with the same confident energy that had carried him through the biggest meeting of his career. Just 2 days earlier, his company had announced his promotion. His hard work had paid off. People shook his hand, congratulated him, and called him the future of the company. For Daniel, it felt like victory, and he believed Emma would feel the same. I did it, he said with a broad smile, stepping closer to the bed. Emma, everything we talked about, it's finally happening. I got the promotion. But Emma didn't react the way he expected. She didn't smile, she didn't congratulate him. She simply watched him quietly, her hands resting on her belly. The calm expressions on her face made Daniel uneasy. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked with a small laugh, trying to lighten the moment. "You should be happy. Everything is going to be easier now." Emma slowly shook her head. "Easier?" she repeated softly. Daniel frowned, confused. Emma took a slow breath before speaking again. "Do you know how many doctor's appointments you missed?" she asked. Daniel opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. Emma continued, her voice steady but filled with quiet pain. "Do you know how many nights I sat alone in this apartment waiting for you to come home?" Daniel looked down at the floor. Emma's eyes moved towards the window as she spoke again. "The night I was rushed to this hospital, I called you 7 times, she said. 7? Daniel's head snapped up in shock. "You what?" he whispered. "I was scared," Emma said calmly. "I thought something was wrong with the baby." The room fell silent. "And you didn't answer," she finished. Daniel felt the confidence inside him slowly disappear. Emma reached for the papers resting on a small table beside her bed. Without anger, without raising her voice, she gently slid them across the table toward him. The bold words at the top were impossible to ignore. "Divorce agreement." Daniel stared at the papers if they were something unreal. Just minutes ago, he had walked in the room feeling like he had finally won in life. But now, standing in front of his wife, Daniel felt something he had not expected: regret. He stood frozen, staring at the divorce papers, as if time itself had stopped. The words on the page felt heavier than anything he had carried in his life. "Divorce agreement." He slowly lifted his eyes to look at Emma. "You can't be serious," Daniel said quietly. His voice was filled with disbelief. "Emma, we are about to have a baby." Emma met his eyes calmly. There was no anger, no crying, no shouting. Her silence carried a strength that frightened Daniel. No more any argument ever could. "Yes," Emma said softly, "we are." Daniel took a step closer. "Then why do this? I worked so hard for our future." Emma placed one hand gently on her belly before speaking. "That's the problem, Daniel. You're chasing the future while forgetting the present." Daniel felt the words cut deeper inside his chest. Emma continued in a steady voice. "Love is not only about promises and success. It needs presence, it needs support, it needs respect." She paused. "I waited for you for months," she said. "I kept hoping the man I married would come back." Her eyes looked tired but peaceful. But the night I went to the hospital alone, I understood something. I was already living this life alone. Emma slowly pushed the divorce papers towards him. I'm not angry, she said. I'm just done waiting. Her hand rested protectively on her belly. I want my child to grow in peace. Daniel had no words left. As Emma looked toward the window, one truth settled quietly in her heart. Success means nothing if you lose the people who believed in you. Sometimes the strongest choice is simply stop waiting and choose self respect.